wish I was on that in mode again. Making music with my friend. I don't be on that road again. Okay, what the fuck's going on here? I gotta push all my buttons. Alright, so tonight we are going to talk about power circuits. Chaos theory. I'm going to touch onto the chaos theory a little bit in the beginning. How would I... Actually, you know what? Let's remove this. Let's go to... I got two photo things open. Let's do this one. That's not quite the right size. So these are circuits that I discovered in my research looking for what are called strange attractors. Strange attractors are generally, basically, there's a feedback loop. There's a system. It doesn't matter what kind of a system it is, whether it's electronic, magnetic. And it would help if I had my mic turned up here. It doesn't matter. I gotta finish this drink. I'm expecting a phone call anytime, so I'll be the first part of the stream is going to be rather short. So, actually, let's do something else here. Let's go back here, projects. Let's open this with Paint. What is this here? That's a filter network. Let's put down a new file. And we're going to color that with black. Let's open up Paint here. That should be at the top. And Paint. Let's see. Kind of goes to the whole thing here. Let's get rid of this. So, in a feedback system, let's see, let's use this. No, let's use green. Actually, let's use brown. Brush size of this. We're going to draw a straight line here, more or less. Then we're going to draw a box. We'll draw a couple boxes here. There's one there. One there. Back to the line. Not very straight, but hey. A stupid little block in there, huh? So, in a feedback system, you have an input. We'll just make it green. And we'll draw another line here. And then the output, we'll make this one blue. And then made another blotch again. Now, we're going to discuss some theory. And the theory that we're going to discuss is in this book right here. And I will show you what book I'm talking about. I want to try to get through this kind of quickly. Introduction to Feedback Control Systems. This is my bread and butter of transducers. And when I say that, this is what is used to transducer is what's used to convert one type of signal into another. Okay, so in the feedback loop, let's go back to the paint diagram here. In the feedback loop, we have a circle, which I believe it starts here. No, it does not, does it? Shit. Does it start here? I thought it... And then we have another straight line. Let's just make this a dark red. It kind of looks like a stop sign. And then, I don't know what this, they're not showing a block there for some reason. There's a plus coming in and a minus. Let's see, so they're saying that this here would be like plus. And then down here, well actually over here, this is like a minus. And then you've got we've got, let's see, make a lighter green. And then, so you've got an output coming here, but what you also have is you've got this. And inside this box, there's a formula. It's a very simple formula. So they're going over some things here in the book. They get a little bit more detailed towards the middle of the book here. We need to find. So that this could represent an operational amplifier. The op amp could be on the bottom, or the transistor could be on the bottom. And there's a feedback from the output of the op amp back to the input. Now, if the feedback is not correct, what can happen is it can oscillate. So in the book here, they're going over some differential equations. I'm not 100% sure exactly why. Differential equations determine limits. So if you have an equation, a polynomial that describes a certain something, you take the differential of that equation, and that determines your limits. That's your upper and lower bounds of that particular equation or system. And limits define areas of instability and things where things go bounce back and forth. Differential equations are related to what is called Laplace transforms, which are an easier way to manipulate the polynomials. And I don't know if I need to go back and study that or not. So there's also polynomials, and these equations have what are called complex and real roots to them. And I don't remember a lot of this. There's also what's called a transient response that's involved in the system. Okay, so block diagrams. We have every feedback control system can be represented by a block diagram. G of S represents all of the components in the forward path between the input and output, which is that box on the bottom. G of S is also sometimes called a direct transfer function. H of S, which is in the feedback loop, represents all the components between the output and input summing point via the feedback path. In many instances, H of S is merely a constant, and quite frequently it's equal to unity. In the case where H of S equals 1 unity feedback, the signal E of S is the difference between the input and the output. I don't know why they've got R of S and C of S in there. The signal F of S represents the feedback signal. So they've developed a formula for the feedback system here. And then there's a closed loop transfer function which relates the output to input. That would be similar to the gain of a system or something. So basically what it amounts to is that if the gain of a system is exceeded, strange things happen. You can have multiple sections of transfer functions, feedback systems, inner feedback systems, outer feedback systems, and they're all determined by an equation which is generally a term thrown into a Laplace transform so that the transfer function is solved. And the transfer function is a representation of the waveform transient response is okay, so there's a signal that continues to rise and then it levels off. That's similar to a capacitor charging. Then you have a quick charge where it bounces up and down between the steady state value. So you have what's called initial conditions in the system. And then there's a steady state value where this system becomes stable if the differential equation states that determines limits in the system. So you've got a formula for a transient response, and it talks about critically damped, underdamped, overdamped. It determines the angular I can't remember what the name of that term is called. Natural frequency of the system, frequency of oscillation in the absence of friction. Damn it. I think that's a steady state number. What the hell is that? What is this? This is a determinant number. If the number is equal to 1, it's critically damped. If it's less than 1, it's underdamped. If it's greater than 1, it's overdamped. It's s squared times 2 times that number times 2 pi f times s plus w s squared equals 0. Then it goes into solving the equation for that value. Radians per second is k over, looks like it's j, I don't know what the fuck that is. That determines a steady state value. Underdamped response to a step input. Steady state. General conditions for a second order system. which also has a steady state response to servo disturbances. There's error coefficients involved in this as well, which is probably something we don't need to get into. Frequency response analysis. Frequency response plots. So this would be if we were to use a sweep generator or not. There's a ripple effect on the end of a filter. Phase bode plot for GFS. Oh, this is another thing too. When they talk about dB per octave, the higher the dB per octave, the sharper the curve is on the other side of these filters. And it does talk about phase change in the filtering circuits. But I'm looking for something. I'm looking for determining stability from Bode plots. Given a certain transfer function, determine the stability. Nyquist plots. That's interesting because that, I don't know if that's related to the Nyquist theorem or not. It depicts magnitude and phase. So this is a different meaning of Nyquist. Relationship between the phase margin and dampening ratio, which looks very similar to a golden mean for some reason. Effective gain. I mean, a lot of this stuff that we can just do trial and error, but I'm wanting to, there's lead lag networks, which is your capacitor. Lead lag network capacitor, separate lag network and a lead network. Lag compensation prevents an increase in gain to reduce steady state error, while lead compensation permits an increase in response without loss of stability. Well, they talk about stability and stuff, but they're not. I'm not finding. I'm not finding what I'm looking for. Is basically what it is. You have closed loop systems and you have open loop systems. Open loop is where there's no feedback. Stable coil. Feedback circuit for a servo recorder. Numerical digital definitions. I don't know what this shit is all about. Geez, what am I gonna do? Go over every page here? Digital to analog conversion. Might be towards the end of this book. This is talking about clock rates, information technology. Multiplexers. Amplifier. talks about motor control, motor starter system, analog computers. Did I go by it, I wonder? I wonder if it's in the other book. You know, it might be in the other book. Wait, what is this here? So we've got nonlinearities. A general second order system, which talks about if a certain number has, there's real and imaginary roots. I'm feeling that what I'm looking for is not in this book. The Nyquist criterion is a stability criterion. Enables one to determine the stability of a system. Closed loop stability can be determined with experimental data from the open loop system. The two plots show essentially the same thing. The Nyquist criterion, however, is more complete. It indicates, if it indicates an instability, the system is absolutely unstable. A Nyquist plot is a graph of the open loop transfer function in the complex frequency plane as a function of omega. Nyquist stability criterion states it, whatever. P is the number of poles in the open loop transfer function. This still is not what I'm looking for. I don't think it was at the beginning. Wait, this is determining GS from Bode plots. You know what? I think it's in the other book. Let me just check something really quick here. Yeah, I go in, I get off tangent sometime. I talk too much most of the time. So my other book, oh shit, that's not the book. Fuck, I don't know what I did with that book either. Damn. I'm probably gonna get a phone call. Well, let me just talk about my goal rather than getting into too much of the theory, I guess. I just don't want to get into too much trial and error and never get it done, you know. So we've got this, and if the feedback is too high, it goes into what's called self-oscillation. Something happens here. So it looks like maybe the oscillations are happening at a much higher frequency than the original system dictates what you're supposed to put in there. So I'm looking through these chaos circuits, and because we did a bunch yesterday, what I'm gonna have you do is we're gonna look at each graph. Well, okay, so the graph in the middle is what the hell is it? It's VT, it's voltage over time. And my guess is, see where the little X mark is on the right over here. You've got there's a 6, there's a 7, there's a 5, there's a 6. It's possible these are the measuring points. And it's only one point. It's like X over T, but there's another one, it's called Y over T, and you put those two together, and that's what gives you your pictures over on the right over here. So if you look carefully at the second one, you can see that there's a pattern. If you look at the bottom two, what I'm basically saying is look for patterns in the noise. So even though the second one has these patterns, the other test point, well, the other test point also has a similar pattern, and they're added together on the oscilloscope, and this is what the design looks like. Now, I'm asking myself a question. I think I have to combine the X and the Y to create one signal. And that's how we send the information. That's how, like, that one signal creates the portal. But, I mean, I don't know. It would have to be... I just don't know. This is all, it's kind of new. But anyway, if you look over on the right at that second picture, you can see the variation between the big loop and the small loop. And all that stuff in between is like what we saw as we were adjusting a value in that feedback, and it was oscillating back and forth. Now, what they're showing here in that second diagram with the spikes, this is, I don't know if it's a Fourier transform, but it's more like the harmonics. It's telling you what are the frequencies that are being generated in this noise. And you can see the scale, it's going from 0 to 15 megahertz. This is all megahertz in all of these. Okay, so we could see if we can develop this, but since this is in megahertz, there's a problem because we can only look at audio frequencies. You could down mix them and put them in, but it's not going to happen. So one option is I've got a receiver, and we can put a load on the receiver to get rid of the noise, and we can look at the RF value. So my oscilloscope goes up to 20 megahertz. Well, at least it goes up to 10, I think. It's, was it 1? Wait, I don't know what it goes up to. Can I find out, I wonder? That goes up to 3 megahertz. There's 3, it's 1 megahertz. The generator only goes up to 2 megahertz. I've got some crystals, but I also have what are called SDR radios, and it would be nice to create that system. I don't have a working spectrum analyzer. They all broke. Oh, I've got an RF meter. A Hewlett Packard. That's an AC voltmeter. I don't know what the frequency response of that is. And these handheld meters, they don't go up very high. The attenuator goes up to 500 megahertz. That's generally an RF generator. We're gonna have to pull out. I've got another. I got two SDR radios. I found one. There was one in a box. And I may have to get that out. But why? Because we want to, I need to determine, well, actually 0 to 5 megahertz is most of this. Let me look at this. This is like, let me look at my, I'm gonna look at my receiver here. And I'm gonna have to go into the back of that receiver, aren't I? And I don't even know about using this receiver. Well, this actually goes down into the kilohertz range. Pre-selector tuning, megahertz. Megahertz. There's a ground. There should be a ground. It needs to be grounded. Fuck. That means I have to pull everything out of that. How do I do that? I mean, I could use, if I used my other radio, it's a lot more sensitive. I wonder, you know what? Let me, well, okay, you know what? I'm going to get a phone call anytime and I don't really have the time. So, the second picture has the harmonics, and they're in the high frequencies. They're like 1 megahertz, stuff like that. Now, we are creating a circuit like this, and we're going to determine if the LEDs in the circuit, we're going to make LED receivers, and we're going to see if the LED receiver picks off this energy. And then we're going to recombine the information through the LED. The space between the LEDs determines the variation in the frequencies that's happening, and the space of infinity in the portal and all of that stuff exists between the two LEDs. The stream is stuck. It is? No, it's not. You should be looking at my diagram here. It's not stuck. So that's the space between the two LEDs. That's a transmitter. That's a receiver. And these frequency diagrams determine a max frequency range. Now, I don't know exactly. I'm guessing that frequency range is the frequency between the limits of oscillation. The question is whether the limits of oscillation contains an area of infinity. Um, if you think about it, well, you don't think about it, but there's an infinite number of infinities between numbers. You can never get from one number to another number. It's just because there's infinity exists in between these numbers. If you divide the number in half each time, you never get to the number that you want to get to, but yet it's still there. So the question is, how do you get from point A to point B in an instant? And so what's happening is these waveforms they're like sweeping back and forth, and that sweep from A to B is going through infinity. It's bypassing infinity altogether. So my opinion is that the speed of light is not existent within these sweeps. And I'm wondering if there's a way to get close to one of these spikes maybe and just kind of listen, you know, change the frequency a little bit back and forth and see if there's something in there. Like you could take a carrier frequency, which is essentially what the receiver does, and then you create. But when you have this frequency that's being generated, and you add the carrier frequency that's being generated, now you've got a sum and difference between two frequencies. And that is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for energy that's created from this, and the only way you can find it is there's a process of elimination. Like it could be different forms of energy. It's just like listening to a radio. But in this case, the information is, I'm hoping the information is going to exist between the two LEDs and not within the circuit itself, because these circuits inherently do not create any magnetic fields. So I'm trying to stay away from magnetic fields for now. But if we look through this and you look at the pictures on the right, you kind of see that there's an open space. There's a circle in there. And you also have to imagine that this picture is drawn in 3 dimensions. It's a projection of a 3-dimensional image. And the other dimension is time. So if you look at the long waveforms, you see a pattern. And in the other axis, the pattern is different. And what they're doing is they're just combining these two to create a 2-dimensional picture, which is actually a projection of a 3-dimensional image, the third dimension being time. And that's why you have this picture that is not escaping. It's not going anywhere. There's no, it only, like the third one here, it's only vibrating between two limits. And the highest frequency is around 2 megahertz. That's how fast that vibration is occurring. And what I'm looking for is what's called a strange attractor. And these circuits, to me, they're all defining patterns. So even in the third one here, there's a group of 7 spikes. And there's a bunch of stuff. Well, these 7 spikes over here look a little bit they look a little different. There's a lot more irregularity here. But when you look at the picture on the right, you see there's a little space in there. that space defines an area of instability, which is your area of infinity, and it's enclosed. It's like wrapping itself around that, and it's not accessing that area. And that's my goal, is to try to do something with the system to keep the system active, but let some of it go out to infinity. And I'm noticing that all of these patterns, all of these images have patterns, and that means that there are limits to the system. And there's not a lot of option for some infinite space to exist. That one on the bottom looks kind of interesting. See, they're just generating these patterns at a certain frequency according to the graph. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to drop this back. Let's go back to the web page, and what we're going to do is we're going to look up strange attractor. Strange and an electronic circuit. We'll go to image. Now, these are not strange attractors. These are attractors with limits. In other words, there's a number of poles in the system, and the particles are attracted to these poles, and they just go back and forth in a circle. They're not strange, meaning there's some aspects of them that go out to infinity. Now, those strange attractor formulas are in the book. And I'm wondering if there's a way to... See, here you can see the three-dimensional aspect in this picture. Oh, they even have it in a box here, but it's displayed as a two-dimensional figure. Chaos and electronic circuits. What's this here? Just do that. I have to go to that book. Strange attractors, dynamic mathematics. Like maybe, between the limits there's the infinite space, and maybe we'll discover something. Okay, there's this picture with the little curly cues. It's very similar to what I built. I'm not seeing. Okay, there's a Lorentz system. That's a formula to create the system, and there's electronics behind this formula, and it's just not so easy to Open controls, speed. So they got little butterflies in there. Curve, animate, see. So this is like the beginning. This is a particle. This is one particle. And over a long period of time, it draws this picture, and eventually it goes back to the beginning. Now you see some of them. Now this has created what's called a self-similar loop, and that's actually going to infinity right there. That particular system. These are kind of like different formulas a little bit. They're based on the same thing, but they're setting up different. So now, like, I look at this stuff and I ask myself, what is it that I'm looking for? You know? So it looks like the butterflies are actually diving into the middle. And maybe there's two infinite spaces there. And if we set the system up to travel through that space, now there's a good example right there. You can see it's thicker down in the middle, and all those butterflies are going down into infinity. The problem with this is it's not stable. A strange attractor will do something like this, but it will build it in a stable form. And this is just an Lorentz attractor with different numbers. And I don't know, like, the only thing I have is a book. And I'm supposed to be getting a phone call pretty quick. So when I go off stream, I'm going to look for, I've got another box that's got transistors in it. I can see that we are going into frequencies that are above audio. I'm going to fire up the receiver and see if I may have to pull that receiver out and put a regular cable of some sort on there so that it's grounded. And that way the radio is not going to pick off anything in the air. It's just going to pick off what's on that resistor in the ground, between the resistor and ground. And we could test the signal to noise ratio of the receiver. In other words, how many microvolts of signal can I put into that receiver and have a certain audio level come out? That's an RF signal to noise ratio, and you determine that by the audio dB. Strange attract. Okay, this might be one here. Well, let's see, there's this and this one. Fractal dimension of the strange attractor of the bouncing ball circuit. From this paper. So they've got a capacitor in here. This looks very similar to the circuit that we have. Between the base, you know, I should take a picture of this. Let's save this as let's see, SA1 pictures, documents, my project. So the positive is set to ground. They're using the negative here. There's RC circuit. I don't think there's a connection between this. That's a diode. They're using one diode in this circuit, going from the output to the input, and that's essentially what we're doing. But he's got 3 diodes in there. Let's grab this information here. And we go to my project, create a new text, and call it SA1 info. R2 and all R are 10 megohms. RI is a 1K resistor. RI, where's RI? That's here. In series with a 2.5 megohm potentiometer. I don't see that. Huh. I don't see. RI is a 1 megohm resistor. RI is a 1K ohm resistor. The fuck? C, and CR. The rectifier in the dashed box is a precision rectifier based on IC4 as shown in the bottom of the figure. Each integrated circuit is an LF356. Note that CFC, RF, and R and the negative input IC all have a common point of contact. What? CF, C, RF, and R. So that is connected. So I'm thinking we could add capacitor to the circuit, but that's going to make it. I don't know what that's going to do to it. I don't know what's going on here. This is a power spectrum, harmonics, and they gradually decay. You can see the repetitive nature of the circuit. Oh, wait a minute. This picture scales. I didn't know that moved. I gotta call it quits here pretty quick. Now, this circuit here, you notice where there's the wide round circle, and then there's this sharp thing that goes up in a straight line. Between the point where this line goes up there and where the line does not go up, that is where that says it's a phase space plot for velocity versus position. That's where your infinity is. Plus is chaotic, or plus is both, and that one's periodic. So periodic means that's your limit. So these points where there's chaos, supposedly, that's where infinity is supposed to be, but I'm just, that's in the low frequency. You know, I'm a little hesitant. I'm skeptical. It's good to be skeptical. I'm a believer, but I'm skeptical too. And I gotta take a break, unfortunately. So that's sort of the basis of what I'm doing. I'm also going to work on power circuits too, and some transducer stuff.